All right, live from the Polymarket Studios in LA, it's the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparin with you guys. So a little bit later in the program, Donald Trump tells us he's not rambling. He's doing something else, which is hilarious. So we'll save that for a little bit later in the program. You'll find out what he's doing when he makes no sense at all. But we do, of course, have significant news out of Israel, as is the case usually these days. So let's get started on that.
All right, let's do it.
Tens of thousands raising their voices, demanding Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu strike a deal to bring home the hostages alive. This outpouring of grief, anger, and frustration prompted by the deaths of 6 Israeli hostages, whose bodies were recovered over the weekend.
Hundreds of thousands of Israelis took to the streets over the weekend in Israel, fueled by rage over the deaths of hostages and the Israeli government's unwillingness to agree to a ceasefire with Hamas. Now, the Israeli military said it had located and recovered the 6 bodies of the Israeli hostages from an underground tunnel in the Rafah area in the Gaza Strip and returned them to the Israeli territory. Israel's health ministry said the 6 abductees were murdered by Hamas terrorists in a number of short-range shots, and that forensic examination indicated that they had been killed in the last few days. But just as the press is urged to not take what the Palestinian health ministry has to say at face value, I would say that you should also do the same when it comes to the Israeli side. They have been caught in lies before. We don't know for sure, and we are unable to confirm what they're saying about how these 6 individuals were killed. Now, protesters insisted a ceasefire deal could have saved their lives, and I happen to agree with them on that. In fact, 3 of the 6 murdered hostages were supposed to be freed during the first round of a ceasefire deal that Hamas agreed to. Even without a permanent ceasefire, they had agreed to it, but Netanyahu rejected it after suddenly adding new provisions, including full control of the Philadelphia corridor. At that point, Hamas rejected the deal. Only 4 American hostages are believed to still be alive in Gaza. 23-year-old Israeli-American Hirsch Goldberg Polin was among the bodies recovered from Gaza. His family fought pretty tirelessly to secure a ceasefire deal in order to save their son, but they spoke at last month's DNC, the Democratic National Convention. They did everything they could, but Netanyahu very clearly does not have an interest in going forward with a ceasefire deal. He wants the war to go on. He wants the war to spread to other parts of the Middle East, and that's the way that he's able to secure his, position of power in Israel. So he's going to keep doing this. He never engaged in good faith to begin with. Now, the remaining 5 hostages were identified as Carmel Gat, 40 years old, Eden Yerushalmi, 24 years old, Alexander Lubanoff, 32 years old, Almog Sarusi, 27, and Ori Danino, 25 years old. Cenk, go ahead.
So, you read the stories of the hostages and how they were shot in cold blood, and it's impossible not to grieve for them and feel great sympathy for them, and that's good. You should. There's any decent human being would grieve for these poor folks captured at a concert. You can imagine yourself at a concert. As I read their bios, it sounds a lot like people we know. I wish we had time to read you nearly 41,000 names and tell you all of their bios and all the parents that are grieving for them and the kids that are grieving for them. But 1, we don't have that time. 2, we don't have all the biographical information ready to go on dead Palestinians because the Palestinians' lives aren't that important here in America. So these 6 lives that are getting massive attention, as they should, how much attention should the 41,000 lives get? Well, it's getting a fraction of that. So, and for understandable reasons, hey, there's video of it. Hey, that's their family member. We can have them as a guest. Hey, that they sound and talk like us and live like us. I get it. I don't want you to not have sympathy for those folks. I want you to have at least as much sympathy for the 41,000 dead. So for most of you, that's easy, super easy. You're a decent human being. That's not gonna be a problem for you. For everybody in Washington, it's not even close. They'd kill 400,000 to get these 6 back. So, because certain lives were worth more than other lives in America. That's just a fact.
Well, they're paid handsomely to feel that way, but let's just turn to Netanyahu and the other extremists within the Israeli government who also don't seem to care at all. I'm not even talking about the Palestinians. They don't seem to care at all about the hostages.
No, that's so true.
The hostages have been nothing more than a massive inconvenience for people like Itamar Ben-Gvir, for people like Benjamin Netanyahu. These are individuals who do not care at all about the hostages. If they cared about the hostages, they wouldn't have cut off food and fuel to the Gaza Strip, which of course impacts the Palestinians, but also impacts the hundreds of hostages that were taken to Gaza. They wouldn't do aerial bombardments knowing full well that the Israeli hostages, much like the Palestinian civilians, could be killed and harmed by those aerial bombardments.
Ben-Gvir is a terrorist, and they're both on the side of ethnic cleansing. And he's literally adjudicated as supporting terrorism, and the Israelis elected a bunch of terrorists and put them in their cabinet. Now we can't get them out. And even though almost all of, well, I shouldn't say almost all of Israel, but a huge chunk of Israel disagrees now with Netanyahu and wants a ceasefire deal. So a family member of one of the hostages made a series of great points on CNN. I'm glad they go out there. You need to understand that these are real people, etc.
We actually have video of him.
So yeah, let's show you the video first, and then I want to fill in some of the facts that he brought up in this segment and others.
So this is Gil Dickman. He is a relative of a hostage and is absolutely furious with Netanyahu's decision to put himself before the lives of the hostages. Let's take a look.
We know that Hamas has agreed to a deal at some point, and Israel was the one putting on more and more terms and actually postponing the deal. And right now we know the decisions that our Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it impossible for Carmel and other hostages to return and put their lives in great danger. And that's what killed them.
So look, Dickman isn't wrong about what he just said there. And in fact, seasoned veteran war journalist Jeremy Scahill recently uncovered documents looking into the back and forth in regard to the ceasefire negotiations. And he found that Hamas was actually willing to let go of one of their so-called non-negotiables, which was a permanent ceasefire. They demanded a permanent ceasefire. Israel would not agree to that. Eventually, Hamas said, okay, fine, then we'll take the demand for a permanent ceasefire out, and then take a look at what Israel, or specifically Benjamin Netanyahu, did after that. Take a look.
President Joe Biden in May announced that that he was going to present a framework for a ceasefire that had actually been presented by Israel. And he said, now the onus is on Hamas to accept this deal. Hamas then looks at it. They gave some notes on it then, within the next 10 days, and they said that they wanted to be able to negotiate a permanent ceasefire in the first phase of the deal. By July 2nd, Hamas had actually backed off of what it was one of their most important demands and made what they thought was a really big concession by taking that language out of what they were insisting on. And then Netanyahu bombards the process with a whole slew of new conditions, including an indefinite presence of Israeli troops in the Philadelphia corridor.
So anyone who claims that Hamas is not agreeing to the ceasefire is lying and intentionally covering up the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu has failed to engage in these ceasefire negotiations in good faith. He doesn't want a ceasefire. He wants this war to spread, which is, by the way, evident in the fact that he is having the IDF now attack or open up other war fronts in areas like Lebanon, for instance. They've bombed Syria. Obviously, they've done bombings in Iran. I mean, he is so desperate, Cenk, for this war to escalate, and he is not in any way interested in a ceasefire deal, which is why you had the mass protests in Israel over the weekend to begin with.
All right, so much to say. So first, they say, Iran's a huge regional danger. They could attack nearby countries. The country saying that is the one that just attacked 3 nearby countries, if you count Palestine, 4 nearby countries, and hit all 3 of them in their capitals. Didn't care at all. Yeah, we'll bomb your capital. We'll kill people inside your capital. We don't care. Oh, you're the one agitating for war. No, Benjamin Netanyahu is definitively the one agitating for war. If it hurts your feelings that, oh no, you have to blame Iran more every time. You have to blame Hamas more every time. No, you don't. He's killed 40 times the number of people that Hamas has. He's bombed way more countries than any mullah in Iran. He's more of a warmonger than any mullah in Iran. If you want to cry about it, go ahead, but you're crying about facts. Okay, so now let's turn to facts that another Israeli-American hostage's father said on CNN. Same segment, a little bit later, Jonathan Dekel-Chen came out and he pointed out, look, first of all, give the Israelis credit. That's the equivalent of 35 million Americans being in the streets this weekend. So that's over 10% of the country. That's a giant number. And that's Israelis saying enough. Second of all, he pointed out, wait, Netanyahu and our negotiators, meaning in his case, the Israeli negotiators, never mentioned the Philadelphia corridor for 8 months in these negotiations. Never once mentioned it. And now 8 months into the process, they're like, oh yeah, we need that corridor. It's absolutely important, it's vital. Well, then why didn't you mention it the entire time?
Right.
Okay, then he explained, Jonathan did, publicly, Israeli military and intelligence leaders have come out and said, we don't have any more military objectives here. We think we should accept a ceasefire.
Right.
We should get the hostages out. Netanyahu goes, I don't care about the stupid IDF, and I don't care about military. I don't care. Certainly doesn't care about intelligence. He knew about October 7th, didn't do anything. The most incompetent, warmonger, disgusting leader right now, destroying his own country, having the entire world hate Israel, continuing this war when everyone wants it to end, including an enormous percentage of the Israelis. But no, he's our roadblock and we can't get rid of him, and he's obviously lying. But guys, there's one other person to blame here. And so we're gonna be honest with you guys in a way that most of media isn't. Joe Biden is massively to blame.
Yep.
Massively. He's basically causing this. Why? The answer is super simple. Threatened to cut Israel's funding. I know, again, if you grew up in America and you got brainwashed by American media, you're like, is that allowed? Isn't that some sort of violation of the Bible or sacrilege? Or is that a violation of our Constitution? Don't we have to give Israel everything they've ever asked for without ever saying endangering a single dollar? Otherwise, isn't the whole country anti-Semites? No, there is no such rule. And by the way, guys, we're asking for the simplest thing, not to even cut the funding, to threaten to cut the funding unless you do a ceasefire deal. And then if they don't do a ceasefire deal, why are we paying them to disagree with us, to create a war we have to fight, and that Israelis don't even want? So if you can't do the bare minimum, I mean, if you're the president of the United States and you don't use that leverage, you're screaming to the world, I don't care about a ceasefire at all. I don't care about any Palestinian lives. This man Netanyahu, I work for him, I worship him, so I'm never gonna cut a single dollar from him, and I'm a sellout liar. Okay, but media, go ahead and kiss Biden's ass and pretend that he's trying to do something. Aren't you guys sick of lying to your audiences? Doesn't one of you just want to say, well, obviously, if you threaten the funding, we'd get to the ceasefire and get all the hostages back and they wouldn't have had to die. But Biden's a giant liar who supports the warmonger, genocidal Netanyahu.
Well, we've seen what's happened to journalists who have been willing to tell the truth about what's currently going on in Israel and Gaza. So it doesn't surprise me that most of the media just kind of falls in line and goes along with the Israeli government's narrative on this whole matter. But the truth is, the Israeli public seems to be a lot more knowledgeable than the American public about what the reality is in regard to these ceasefire negotiations. I want to give you a few more comments, including Tel Aviv resident Ori Elman, who told NPR, Bibi is the prime minister, he holds the key for the deal. He can keep on putting more and more obstacles and demands, but that's not relevant. Israel's courts, by the way, got involved in shutting down the general strike that was taking place in Israel following word of the 6 bodies that had been recovered. So Israel's labor court ordered the strike to come to an end by Monday afternoon at 2:30 p.m. local time. And at that point, the main trade union that was responsible for facilitating this general strike said that it will abide by that decision. and called off the strike. And so it is amazing how like the Israeli courts are more concerned about Israelis speaking out against how Netanyahu is handling this, as opposed to actually doing something about the fact that Netanyahu is not engaging in these ceasefire negotiations in good faith at all. But look, that's what the reality of the situation is. And even Biden, Cenk, will have these moments of honesty. So what am I talking about? Well, take a look at the most recent example of Biden. On one hand, admitting the truth, but he never puts any action behind any of this. Let's take a look.
Do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
He's not doing enough.
And neither are you.
No,
so.
But exactly. So I just love the reports where it's like, ooh, Biden, who has been very reluctant to take any jabs at Netanyahu publicly, is now saying that Netanyahu hasn't done enough. We all know that he hasn't done enough. Anyone paying close attention knows that he hasn't been doing enough. The problem is you have a United States government led by Biden refusing to use any of its leverage to essentially push Netanyahu and the Israeli government to agree to a ceasefire. And by the way, let's also just note for the record, based on Kamala Harris's DNC speech, it's very clear that she plans on continuing with the same Biden-era policies in response to Israel. So we don't really have much to look forward to in terms of new leadership, approaching this issue differently.
Look, I like Kamala Harris for other reasons, and I think Donald Trump's a danger to the world. But Kamala Harris made it very clear in the interview that she will never dare to disagree with AIPAC. She said, "Oh no, our beloved Israel. Well, I will never withdraw any dollars." And there's all this nonsense talk. I mean, Ro Khanna went on the Sunday shows this weekend and said, "Oh, she might be open to a new policy." No, brothers and sisters. You're either going to get the ceasefire now, or you're about to get a giant war in the Middle East when Iran counterbombs. Okay, and America has said take it or leave it. And so if they leave it, we're going to total and utter war, and we're going to get no ceasefire. We're going to get a lot more dead hostages, a lot more dead Palestinians, etc. So I'm not interested in her maybe changing her policies 6 months or 6 years from now.
It doesn't matter what
and
you're
it's not
interested in.
true. I like Ro Khanna a lot. He comes on here, he's an honest guy, and I'm sure that he actually believes it. But Kamala Harris made it very clear in the interview, she will serve Israel as her top priority and will never change our policies. If you're gonna change the policies, this would be the time when all these lives are on the line. So spare me your BS about, oh yeah, I'm gonna change it later. My ass you are. You will do exactly as your donors ordered, and it makes me lose faith that you will do anything on prices, housing, drug costs, etc., because you're completely and utterly controlled by donors, which is our #1 problem in this country. So I know Trump is the same and worse, I know. So look, last couple of things here involve the media. So #1, good news about the media is that it's not the old days. They can't control information getting out. So as I see interviews with Israelis, they are saying things that I have never seen Israelis say in my entire lifetime, where they're being honest about their own prime minister. They're almost asking America, for God's sake, use the leverage. Use the leverage, what the hell do you have it for, right? And so they know that Netanyahu's lying. They're clearly calling out how he's lying, why he's lying. So they know. So for you out there that are young, you might not understand why that's a big deal. In the old days, you basically just had one monolithic mainstream media, both in America, less so in Israel. Actually, Israel's press has been better overall historically. But they would put out the message, the Israeli prime minister is 100% truthful about everything, and every dirty Palestinian is a goddamn liar, and everyone would believe that. Now, Israelis don't believe it. Israelis are going, no, I saw it with my own eyes. Our leader is definitely lying. And that's an awesome development, because that means the truth is getting out. And then finally, what I would ask our American media almost to catch up to Israeli media that has oftentimes done a better job. So Israel tells you, oh, we found a bunch of dead bodies in a tunnel we were about to go into. Oh, what a coincidence. Do you want to ask, why did you find them there? How did you find them there? Were you about to raid that tunnel? Because that's what it looks like. Because the last time you raided a tunnel in June, you made a big deal about how you were such heroes and the military solution was the right solution because you could always rescue them. Well, now it looks like you didn't rescue them, you botched it, and you got them killed. So when we gave you enormous credit last time, shouldn't we now talk about how the military solution was not the correct solution, and it got those hostages killed because of your dumb plan of doing a military solution instead of doing a ceasefire? US media, where are you? No, every one of them. Oh, they found them shortly after they went into the tunnels. Oh, look at that. They were killed shortly before they went into the tunnels. Gee, I wonder why. And by the way, if you don't know, there is some good press out there and they explain, yeah, after the raid in June where they rescued some hostages, the IDF did, Hamas put out a new order. If the IDF is coming, kill the hostages. You didn't think that was gonna happen? Okay, everybody condemn Hamas. Oh, you are terrible people. What? Yes, of course don't kill the hostages. Of course don't shoot them in the back of the head. But us yelling at Hamas isn't gonna make any difference at all. What makes a difference in saving those lives is to get to a deal where we get them back instead of doing these dumb strategies of, oh, I'm so macho, I'm gonna go rescue them. Well, you got them killed instead.
All right, when we come back, we have an awesome interview with David Sirota about money in politics. He has an amazing new podcast series out. So we'll get to that and more when we return. Don't miss it.
Indisputable, exclusive, disputable, exclusive. We brought you this first. No other news agency has this video. No other news agency has this story.
Every week on Indisputable, we do original, exclusive, investigative reporting you'll find nowhere else.
Our reports have been viewed by millions. Hosted by Sean King, Ben Crump, Senator John Ossoff.
You, through your investigative reporting, unearthed very troubling allegations about specific forms of abuse and discrimination in the federal prison system.
We catching these cases on camera. Just imagine the things that we don't see.
Our groundbreaking investigations and exclusive interviews bring you the real voices no one else wants you to hear. We tell the stories.
Imagine a prison that is so racist, the corrections officers contact me. That is a life or death situation being created. A black woman who was driving for Uber was allegedly assaulted by a white male passenger. After we got involved, roughly 24 hours later, the police all of a sudden opened up an investigation. What was going through your mind when bullets were simply flying inside of your vehicle?
Honestly, I thought I was going to die.
Did these officers ever say that you fit the description of somebody they were looking for? Did they say that?
Never.
Okay, that means they lied.
And we want you to be part of our truth-telling movement. Send pictures and video of stories no one else is telling and a 1 or 2 paragraph summary of the story to Indisputable's exclusive tip line at indvideos@tyt.com.
If you have more information about what's happening at this particular facility, please let me know.
Together, we're challenging the system, and together, we're making a difference.
I have the entire background to this story, and it is going to make your blood boil.
Indisputable with Dr. Rashad Ritchie, unveiling the truth, empowering the people. Weekdays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Pacific.
All right, let me do a little quick plug here. It's not even a plug. I'm bragging, okay? I'm bragging. Watch me. We have a channel on YouTube, a whole channel devoted just to the Young Turks. It's badass, right? Wow, man. I can see the void.
You guys are rock stars.
Unbelievable. Senator Sanders, welcome to Rebel Headquarters. Man, you guys are amazing. We gave you what you wanted. Okay. Speaking of shirts.
I have a surprise.
You reached a lot of people. You are the Young Turks. And we have spread that progressive message wide and far. Let's keep it going. The craziest, dumbest things Donald Trump has ever done. It's a battle royale at TrumpBrackets.com.
TYT is thankful for all of the support we've received from our audience. I know that we're all living through a dark time. The economy is a mess, the two-party system is failing us, and the threat of climate change is growing. Jake started this company in his apartment, and look where we are today. I've experienced what we can accomplish when we work together. So let's keep moving towards positive change. Join our movement at tyt.com/team.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys, and these lovely folks, Nero Ragabo and Niels Gertz. Thank you for becoming Young Turks members. They hit the join button below. So did Deborah 66, Andy Mion 2300, and Jamie Zagazita. And thank you for joining at the premium level. You guys make this show possible. Sam, Monica, thank you for gifting 5 memberships. All right, now we have a great interview for you guys about the real core problems in politics.
All right. Well, you know, something we talk about here at TYT often is the corrupting nature of money in politics. And if you look at the history of recent elections, you'll see election cycle after election cycle, more and more money is poured into campaign coffers with, of course, strings attached. Take a look at this chart that shows you how much money in politics has impacted our elections in recent years. In 2022, you see the amount of money that's been spent on congressional races. The yellow represents presidential races. And year after year, you'll see that the amount of money that pours into campaign coffers increases. Let's take a look at the amount of money spent on lobbying each election cycle. In 2016, $3.16 billion spent on lobbying around the elections. By 2023, that number had already grown to $4.27 billion. And so sometimes it feels like we're alone here at TYT and constantly talking about this issue because this is really the root of every problem we have. But luckily, now we have a podcast series that's helping us out in spreading that message. It's an incredible podcast series. Here to talk to us about it is David Sirota, editor-in-chief of The Lever, former speechwriter for Bernie Sanders, and the man behind this new podcast series called Master Plan, which uncovers how corruption has absolutely destroyed America's democracy. David Sirota, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks to both of you. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Well, let me start off with the first question. You know, I already love the podcast. I've already listened to the available episodes. And you kind of open up the series by discussing how all the way back in the 1970s, Americans were already pretty furious about the corrupting impact of money in politics. And Nixon pretended to do something about it, but it was really just a joke. So can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. So in the early 1970s, this was before Watergate, there was a scandal in which Richard Nixon was essentially trading government favors for campaign cash when it came to food policy, specifically keeping the price of milk high in order to raise money from milk producers, the big dairy conglomerates. And this scandal helped fuel a push for the first Anti-Corruption Federal Election Campaign Act in 50 years. And it passed. Nixon signed it. Side note, Nixon tried to kill it before he signed it, although he pretended the whole way in public that he was for it. We found memos in which his White House was actually trying to kill it. He gets shamed into essentially signing it. And then very soon after, he and his henchmen are working furiously to go around it in order to use illegal campaign money, illegal secret campaign money to fund the Watergate break-in. Ultimately, they get obviously caught. I think a lot of people know about the break-in. I think not a lot of people understand that it was the first campaign finance major campaign finance scandal of the modern era, in which major corporations, we're talking corporations like American Airlines, were prosecuted for illegal campaign donations that were it's like the first dark money donations that were secret, that were kept secret. And out of that came the modern campaign finance laws, building off of those earlier campaign finance laws. But again, the process of trying to weaken and water them down and kill them was already set in motion. And it was set in motion in part by a guy who Nixon had appointed to the Supreme Court, a guy named Lewis Powell, who had written a memo saying that corporations needed to, in the face of the rising tide of reforms of government policy, this is the time of Nader, of the creation of Medicare, Medicaid, the EPA, et cetera, Powell writes this memo saying the corporate forces need to do everything they can to use their money to take over the political system, because essentially the government had become too democratically responsive to the people. And part of that plan was stacking the judiciary with conservative justices and a focus on deregulating the campaign finance system. And so what came out of that, even after the Watergate reforms, was an effort first to add loopholes to those reforms that allowed for the explosion of corporate PACs. And then soon after that, the two major cases that were at the time radical that created the idea that money is speech, not corruption, and that those constitutionally protected rights to free speech extend to corporations and their spending in elections. That came out of the Buckley case, that came out of the Bellotti case, Lewis Powell participating in both of those, essentially executing his memo. And fast forward, here we are in the era of corruption.
Yep. So David, I want to talk more about that. It's obviously a huge part of my book, Justice is Coming, that same Powell memo, Buckley, Bellotti, and how they basically stole this country from us. But I wanted to ask a broader question first. So as I watched or listened to the first couple of podcasts in the series, an interesting thing pops out. One is, since in Nixon's case there's the tapes, you can hear with your own ears how much they lie. How you hear them in the Oval Office saying like, oh, we got to help the milk guys, they're giving us money, and make sure we kill this legislation. And then you see them or you hear them in an interview that you guys found saying the next week on air, oh my God, we got to get these reforms to make sure that we protect the American people. So like the mendacity is so audacious that it makes you realize how like they have no conscience in lying at all about, they're just glorified actors. And then with the milk companies, big milk as you called it in the beginning of the series, and it really is. To me, it was like the minute you hear it, it becomes obvious. Well, of course, the people with a lot of money and power, and of course the companies with a lot of money and power are going to want to keep that money and power and add to it. And if you wanted to do that, you would obviously go capture the government. And how would you do that? By giving money to the politicians. So I wonder if you're getting a reaction back and a question to you that in regards to the media, let's put it this way, okay? Because I think a lot of Americans, they might, if you ask them, do you know that, they'd probably say like, yeah, I guess so. I guess I knew that, and I hate corruption. But I don't think that it actually resonates with people on a visceral level until they hear it with their own ears and see it with their own eyes. And so finally getting to the question, has the media here woven a tale for us over the last 40, 50 years of an act, a play that's being played in Washington that isn't even close to reality? That reality is what they do in the White House, talking brazenly about, and it's not just Nixon, it's all these politicians. Oh yeah, let's get the money and then do the favors for the donors. And the only reason that the American people don't know that in its entirety is because the media has hid that from them.
Yeah, I think that there is reporting on pay-to-play corruption that periodically crops up in the headlines. But I think that over many years, the country has become desensitized in a sense to it. I think in the country becoming desensitized to corruption, in essentially thinking that corruption now is just the way it's done. It's no longer scandalous. It's just what politics is. That in many cases, the media doesn't see the corruption, doesn't see money in politics as quote unquote news. It's just the way it is. And that really is the process of normalizing corruption. Now, I would also say this, that at times in our history, political leaders have said, no, I'm not going to accept the idea that this is normal and acceptable and not even newsworthy. In our series, in later episodes, we get into an example of that. John McCain, in his 2000 presidential run. John McCain, people I think forget about this part of his political career. John McCain's first major set of headlines when in politics was in the Keating 5 scandal, where he was one of 5 senators who was caught pressuring a federal banking regulator on behalf of a donor. And unlike most politicians, John McCain reacted to that not by pretending it didn't happen, not by retiring, but instead by joining the campaign finance reform crusade with the zeal of a convert. And he ultimately ran for president on an anti-corruption campaign finance reform message. And in the podcast, you'll hear his aides talking, saying, we told him we didn't think it was going to be a very big resonant issue among voters. And he said, I think it's going to be. And it ended up being his entire brand. Now, he didn't win the Republican primary, but ultimately he got George W. Bush, the personification of money in politics, to actually sign campaign finance reform legislation. And the Supreme Court actually upheld it. So now you could say, well, the Supreme Court was then, they replaced Rehnquist and O'Connor, and they quickly then overturned it. That's true. But I think the point here is that clearly the public understands how corrupt the situation is, doesn't like it, and is waiting for political leadership to actually raise the issue and say this is not normal. We haven't really had that political leadership. I mean, I think Bernie Sanders tried to raise that issue, that set of issues, in his presidential campaigns. But I think the last time you can really say it was salient at the center of our politics as a political issue, you probably have to reach back about 25 years to John McCain's campaign.
I mean, look, I don't think anything positive has happened in this country with Americans just sitting by hoping that political leadership is going to do the right thing. So I think that's the number one mistake. But I also don't begrudge the American people in feeling a little bit hopeless in this particular issue, because the very people who would have to change the laws and pass reforms are people who are enjoying the status quo, members of Congress who love the money pouring into their campaign coffers. And just real quick, going back to the brief discussion we had about the media and why journalists kind of refuse to put this story front and center, I don't think it's necessarily because they feel the American public is desensitized to this issue or that the journalists themselves are desensitized to this issue. The fact of the matter is, our journalistic organizations and institutions have also been captured by the same money. I mean, you look at the legacy media outlets, and they're usually under this massive conglomerate, massive corporation that probably doesn't want a lot of in-depth reporting about how our democratic process and our democracy has been completely undermined by money in politics. And so it's not just about passing laws to do something about campaign finance reform. I just think money has had a corrupting influence on a lot of our major institutions. Is that something that you touch on in your podcast?
We do. Yeah, it's a really good point. And I would also add that I think it's actually worse when we talk about money in politics coverage, because while I mentioned once in a while there are some scandals that come out and that are reported, most of the money in politics coverage is celebrating the money in politics. We judge candidates based on who has raised the most money, and we denigrate candidates who haven't raised enough money from, again, typically corporate special interests, billionaires who want government favors. So the coverage is really, in a sense, Orwellian. And I think you're right. It does tie back to who's delivering the coverage. If you're a major corporation and you have a media brand outlet, you're not going to want your media brand to scandalize money in politics. If you're the giant corporate conglomerate it has business before the same government that's being elected with that money. That's absolutely true. And we get into this. What we're really talking about is going beyond the legislative debate to whether corruption is being normalized psychologically, culturally. And what I fear, and what we get to at the very end of the series, is that I fear it's like the David Foster Wallace speech about the two fish. One fish swims by another fish, says, "Hey, how's the water today?" And the other fish says, "What's water?" That we're all so used to being immersed in corruption that it almost seems like it's just the system. I mean, let's not forget, Bernie Sanders in 2020 felt compelled to apologize for an op-ed written by Zephyr Teachout in the presidential campaign, pointing out Joe Biden's all too close relationship with corporate donors. She said he has a corruption problem. Bernie Sanders felt compelled to apologize for that. Katie Porter said after her loss in the Senate race, said something to the effect of billionaire spending, at that point it was crypto billionaires, billionaire spending ends up rigging elections. And she was vilified for saying that. And the reason I bring that up is because you start wondering, wait a minute, the culture is now, the political culture, the political class is sort of saying corruption isn't the problem, calling out corruption is the problem. And if we get to that point, if we accept that level of normalization, then I think there really is no pendulum swing back to the era of reform. It means we've accepted this as just what American politics is. I don't accept it. I don't think we should accept it.
Yeah. David, one more question for me, at least on this. So, as usual, I agree with so much of what you're saying, and media is such a huge portion of this. That's partly why you started the lever. I started the Young Turks to counter these media narratives that, as you point out, are just Orwellian. It's absurd to say, oh, the person who got bribed the most, congratulations, you're the leading candidate, you're wonderful. Oh my God, Katie Porter, you called out corruption, which is clearly there and definitely affected your race. How dare you, you're so evil for a point. I mean, that's insanity. And by the way, McCain in 2000 was the last Republican I voted for, so I feel good about that vote too. But overall, look, as I wrote about Lewis Powell, your Master Plan podcast is about this memo, this unfortunately worked more brilliantly than any political memo in history, and that he wrote in 1971, basically laying out a blueprint for corporate rule and how corporations can take over the US government, take over our democracy, and rule us all. And they executed it pretty much perfectly. And one of the things he reminded them of is, hey, you knuckleheads, you got more money than everybody else. Just start spending it, and the politicians will do whatever you want. And of course, the two things you should capture are the media and the courts. So that leads to, again, David, I think we live under corporate rule. But since almost no one in corporate media, mainstream media, establishment media, whatever you want to call it, ever says that phrase, corporate rule, and if you said it, they would probably call you a conspiracy theorist, right? That it doesn't wake the American people up to the fact that, oh right, almost everything we do, we can't even negotiate drug prices with drug companies because they're corporations and they control what we pay. It's not a free market. There's no bid contracts over and over in the government. And we can go on and on, right?
In fact, let me jump in on this and kind of piggyback off your question, Cenk, because the other thing that's been kind of fascinating to watch is how right-wing media has managed to spin the corruption and like reshift the focus of Republican voters toward corporations, but not over how they facilitate and engage in this corruption, but over the influence they have culturally, right? These corporations are too woke. That's the real problem. No, the real problem is these corporations are really the ones who call the shots on how you're treated at work, what you're getting paid at work, what your neighborhood looks like. Every issue that touches you on a daily basis is impacted by money in politics. It has less to do with virtue signaling about cultural issues and more to do with the fact that these companies are looking out for their bottom line.
Yeah.
And I think this speaks to the democracy crisis. Like I have been kind of shaken by the fact, not surprised, but disturbed by the fact that we're supposedly having a conversation in this election about saving democracy.
Right.
Democracy, we've got to save democracy, democracy's survival. A lot of that talk, by the way, at the Democratic Convention, a convention sponsored by the anti-democratic forces in our politics. Corporations are, and their takeover of the government is the democracy crisis, right? I mean, that is the long-term democracy crisis. It is a crisis. Lewis Powell's memo is an outline for ending or certainly limiting democracy, limiting the one person, one vote paradigm of how power is supposed to be dispersed and distributed in this country to a point where money essentially short circuits that democratic idea. So what's really crazy to me is there's all this talk of democracy in election where there's more and more corporate money, more and more anonymous dark money that's actually buying the election. Like, if you're worried about the democracy crisis right now, let me introduce you to the last 50 years of creating, as you call it, Cenk, corporate rule in America.
David, it is increasingly difficult to find any journalist who is actually motivated by their principles, their values, and you have always stayed true to your principles and values. So thank you so much for everything you do. Thank you for putting this podcast series out. Again, everyone, it's called Master Plan. Please check it out wherever you get your podcasts. I listened on Apple podcasts. And thank you again, David. I hope you come back soon to talk to us about anything involving money in politics or the political landscape in general.
Thanks to both of you. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you, David. All right, we're gonna take a quick break. Lots of your comments about David, money in politics, including some conservatives who want to weigh in. So we'll come back for the social break in a minute. All right, let's start with Super Chat. Demjukes Do 29 wrote in, monumental progress could be made if the progressive populist left and the America First populist right united to get money out of politics and stop aiding Israel. You'd be stunned by how many America First people watch this show, including myself. Well, first of all, that's awesome and we appreciate you. And second of all, you're totally right, and it isn't just about Israel. It's about corporations that are literally killing us here. 68,000 Americans die every year because they don't have health insurance. That happens in no other developed nation. That number is 0 in all other developed nations because they have universal health care. We can't have universal health care because there's an entire health insurance industry whose whole premise is rob them blind, provide almost no service for them. You can have health insurance on top of universal health insurance, but to have it as your main system, there's no other country on earth that thinks that's the correct system. Ours costs twice as much because they're robbing us and giving us worse results. So yes, the populist left and the populist right have to unite. We got to get past the culture wars and focus on eyes on the prize, guys. Get big money out of politics. Otherwise, we're all gonna live under corporate rule and we're all gonna be arguing over DEI and woke this and woke that, when in reality we're awake and not, we're asleep and not realizing that corporations rule the government and all of us. Me being me 24 says Kamala's handling of this issue, meaning Israel, is in no way clear. It's just your speculation, but she's still VP. Want her to go against her boss? First of all, yes, I definitely want her to go against her boss. I don't see why that's such a big deal. Like everybody, look, let's note the Democrats go, oh, Mike Pence was such a hero for going against his president, Donald Trump, when Donald Trump said, don't certify the election. Now, if Kamala Harris disagrees with Biden an inch, they'll be like, you traitor, how could you? Bow your head to the leader. When did the Democrats become the authoritarian party?
She made a very clear pledge during her speech, very clear pledge that she will in no way threaten the arms shipments to Israel.
Yeah, there's no ambiguity about it.
Should we not believe her? Should we just think she was lying? I don't know.
I know you're like a diehard Democrat who thinks the Democrats are angels and not affected by all the donor money. And Mike, oh, it's just a coincidence she got over $5 million and Biden got over $11 million from AIPAC. Oh, and now, oh, look at that. They say we can't ever question Israel, even though it would actually help Israel in this case, because they're not wedded to Jewish Americans. They're not wedded to Israel. They're wedded to AIPAC. Because AIPAC's the one giving them money, and AIPAC is the one that is for right-wing genocidal government of Benjamin Netanyahu. So you're, okay, listen, you watch the show for a long time, and I appreciate you, and that's why I read your comments. You keep watching us and mainstream media and see who's right and who's wrong. I guarantee you she's not gonna do anything to challenge Israel, and she's gonna fold like a lawn chair, and she will for almost all of our donors. Why am I in favor of her? Because I don't want Donald Trump to destroy democracy. And this shirt's a vote based on the Supreme Court. ShopTYT.com, and I appreciate the people pointing it out. And yeah, because the Supreme Court's the one that led to the corruption and we gotta take it back. But overall, don't cover for her when she doesn't earn it. Cenk and Anna back on the Young Turks. Angie Davis, thanks for hitting the join button below, becoming a member. And these wonderful people that gave through tyt.com/team. Eric Beckwith, Triple B16, Think Huge 91, Cerber, US Alpha Gaming. I appreciate all you guys, all you sign up through there and donate through there. That is ideal, tyt.com/team. That's great. And Triple B16, you'll be getting a call from me too. Anyone who gives over $100, I call. All right, Anna.
Well, the ongoing war in Gaza is putting the lives of our service members at risk, and no story makes that clearer than what you're about to watch.
A mob captured on video holding one of the men and putting a sack over his head amid chants of "Yankee, go home."
More than a dozen Turkish individuals who are part of a nationalist group attacked 2 American Marines as they were on a break. Now, the attackers are allegedly members of a Turkish youth union, which is a secular nationalist group that opposes both US and EU influence on Turkey. Now, the Turkish Youth Union posted a video of the attack on social media, which showed a group pushing 2 men and covering one of their heads in a white sack to chants in English of "Yankee, go home." Here are more details on the attack itself.
The group grabs hold of him and they put a bag over his head. Another US Marine rushes in to try to save him. He is also attacked. All this happening on the street in Izmir, which is a city in the west of the country. These 2 men were on shore leave from the USS Wasp, which is stationed in the Aegean. 15 people have been arrested as a result.
According to local officials, a group of 15 people, including 13 men and 2 women, attacked the service members who have been dressed in civilian clothes. The mob, part of a nationalist anti-American youth group, were immediately apprehended. Officials say 5 other Marines were involved. The 2 Marines who were attacked are assigned to the 24th Expeditionary Unit on board the USS Wasp and were taken to a local hospital as a precaution, but sustained no injuries, according to a Navy spokesperson.
Now, the post featuring that video that was posted by this nationalist group also included the following message: US soldiers who carry the blood of our soldiers and thousands of Palestinians on their hands cannot defile our country. And I have more details on this. As was noted in that report, everyone involved has been arrested. But you should also know that there has been an increased presence of US military in that region over the ongoing war in Gaza. As we know, you have Houthi rebels who are retaliating over Israel's treatment and slaughter of Palestinians. Same with Hezbollah in Lebanon. I mean, all of this is spreading, and rather than doing what's necessary to ease tensions and end this war, the US continues to enable Israel, things continue to escalate, and we keep sending more of our soldiers to the region in order to protect Israel from a potential Iranian attack. Cenk.
Yeah, there's 2 parts of the story. First, I hate watching that video. It's kind of stomach churning anytime that somebody puts a bag over somebody's head. And obviously I'm Turkish. Seeing the Turks do that, it bothers me greatly. And if you don't know, the reason they're doing that is because back in 2003, after the Iraq War, Turkey did not support us going into Iraq. That was because, like France, they were a true ally to America and tried to prevent us from doing something that they realized was a giant mistake, and they were correct. But after the war started, the Americans captured 11 Turks in northern Iraq, and they were commandos, and they put bags over their heads like that, and that enraged the Turkish citizens because this America and Turkey are supposed to be allies, and they thought, oh, here we are. It turns out we're not allies. They're just treating us like Muslims, and this is what they do to all Muslims: is humiliate them like this, even though those are our top commandos that are in alliance with America, right? So that's why they do that, but it doesn't. No, number one, no one knows that outside of Turkey, right? Mm-hmm. So it looks terrible. It also paints Muslims in a bad light because it makes it look like, oh, look, here is Muslims putting a bag over American Marines' heads. I hate it in every way. The only thing is, I know Turkish reaction to stuff like this, Turkish government's reaction, which is that they will regulate. So those guys will get more than a talking to when they get taken in. And the reason that the Turkish government will retaliate against the nationalists that did this is number one, yeah, we might huff and puff, but our alliance with America, Turkish alliance with America, is super important. Those bases in Turkey are super important both militarily and economically. But most importantly, Turkey relies on tourism. And so they do not want to see any foreigners touched in any way. And so they will send a signal, don't you goddamn do this again, right? For economic reasons and alliance, military reasons, et cetera, you get it. Now the second part of it is, look, you have to be realistic. If you're wondering why secular Turks are mad at America, and you're wondering why Iran hates America, and you're wondering why Houthis in Yemen are attacking Western ships, and you're wondering all these things, I have an answer for you. It's not at all complicated. All you have to do is ask them.
Ooh, they're jealous of our freedom?
But guys, I mean,
that was literally what our government kept gaslighting us with over and over again.
But not just our government. That was George Bush and Dick Cheney with those comical talking points about, oh, these dirty Muslims in Iraq and Afghanistan, et cetera. They hate us for our freedoms. Oh, if we murder them enough, then they'll love us for our freedoms.
Yeah, they don't hate Norway for their freedoms, right? Or any other Scandinavian country, which actually enjoys a lot more freedom than we do in a lot of different ways. But just America.
Yeah. And so, but every one of these groups, whether they're bad guys or just normal frustrated Muslims throughout the world, it says the same thing. It's not that they hate Israel, it's that they hate the occupation of Palestine. And so, and if you look, easy for you to relate. If you're a Christian, for example, and you saw on the news every day, one country going, look at what we do to these Christians, and just humiliate them, beat them, occupy them, oppress them, kill them whenever they want, cut off their power and electricity, starve them, and go, what are you gonna do about it, Christians? Ha ha, you're too weak, you can't do anything. Now, what do you think that would do? At some point, a lot of Christians in the world would go, well, God damn it, enough of this. What do I have to do to make sure you stop doing that? Not just because we care about those people, but because you're humiliating the rest of us. So that's why this happened, that they state that it's because of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And every time there's an outburst against America like this from the Middle East, they all clearly say it's because of the humiliating occupation of Palestine that America funds. But our media doesn't report that. So they're like, oh, I don't know, I guess Muslims just randomly hate us. Oh, I guess we've been in all these wars randomly, not because we're unilaterally supporting and funding Israel, which is driving Muslims across the world to despise us because we're in favor of that oppression.
Now, there are some moments of clarity in the media. Usually it's in print journalism, and The Hill recently was willing to publish an op-ed written by writer Kay Ward Cummings. The title of the piece is the US relationship with Israel still worth it? And there are some excerpts in there that I think most Americans are probably unaware of, right? Not out of any wrongdoing or lack of intellectual curiosity, but because these are difficult truths that typically are not reported in our press. So I'm gonna give you a few excerpts that I think are important. He writes that the US has paid a heavy price for our relationship with Israel over the years, not just in treasure, but also in blood. According to the 9/11 Commission, US support for Israel was a key reason for the attacks on September 11th, 2001. By the way, our invasion of Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11, was also heavily influenced by the Israeli government. Going back to the piece, he also writes that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's animus toward the United States stemmed not from his experiences in the United States as a student, but rather from this violent disagreement with US foreign policy favoring Israel, reads the 9/11 Commission's report. Today, as tensions in the region escalate, experts are concerned that the chance of an assault on the US is also growing. US intelligence officials say that there's a rising risk Lebanese Hezbollah militants will strike Americans in the Middle East, even potentially hit inside the United States. So when the US gets attacked, when our service members get attacked, it is important to understand that there is a motive, a reason for why that attack happened, or a motivation behind that attack. We need to understand those motivations in order to prevent those attacks from happening in the future. The problem is, those motivations are usually buried, so the American people are totally left in the dark about what's really going on.
So. Yeah, and so look, that's why I get so frustrated in American media, because it's not like this stuff is complicated. You could just take any statement on why whether it's a government group or individual, a Muslim acts out against America. They all tell you it's because you guys support Israel's occupation of Palestine. And yet our media almost never reports that. Yep. Well, that's weird. Isn't that weird? Why are they not doing that? And so there's groupthink in DC and in New York. And until this last conflict, it was absolute sacrilege to ever criticize Israel or to ever say that something might be because of Israel. And so part of it was understandable. Hey, you don't want to, revive anti-Semitic tropes about how Jews control everything, etc. And those are awful, and that's not what's going on here. And I understand that hesitation. But what it led to was, whether that was the sole reason or only part of the reason, what it led to was this criticism-free zone for Israel in America. Oh no! When Israel puts people in camps, 5.5 million people in camps, that's totally great. That's wonderful. They had to. Hamas made them do it. Well, how about before Hamas? The occupation's been around for 57 years. The goddamn Palestinians made them do it. It's all the Muslims' fault. And as Morning Joe once famously said, so it's not just right-wing media and it's not just the government. It's definitely mainstream media. He said, oh, the Muslims? They hate us because they hate us. They hate us because they hate us.
Great explanation.
They hate us because they hate us. He said it 3 times. Just to reassure you, don't worry, I am a full-blown idiot or a total propagandist for the Israeli government, pretending the Muslims hate us for no apparent reason. Okay, oh, because they're against civilization and they're dark. Everything that people have said about Muslim people all across the world in American media has been a sick, disgusting lie. There's a real reason why they're upset, and the reason is not complicated. It's the occupation of Palestine. So, but at the end of the day, Turkey has to show that they're getting tough on these nationalists, because we can't have that. That's crazy. You can't attack Americans like that. You can't attack Marines like that. There's got to be consequences for that. And if the Turkish government doesn't regulate on these guys, then America should do some sort of disincentive to the Turkish government to make sure nothing like this happens again.
All right, when we come back for the second hour of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about some efforts to crush American protesters, and this time it wasn't Netanyahu. Turns out that it was the Chinese government that did so. That story is insane, it's incredible, really good piece of investigative reporting. Stick around, we'll share that story and more with you when we return.
Indisputable is still the fastest growing news show in America compared to CNN, Fox News, and 30 other networks. We tell the truth on Indisputable because the truth is indisputable. We go places that other news media outlets refuse to go. When there were human rights abuses happening at the Victorville prison, guards and members of the community contacted us.
You, through your investigative reporting, unearthed very troubling allegations about specific forms of abuse and discrimination in the federal prison system.
It really doesn't take much to be a trusted voice. All it takes is to be fearless, report on matters, be an advocate. I called it the bullpen intentionally because it's a place of preparation. We present individuals who may have an opposing view, so we debate. Sometimes we interview individuals because their stories deserve to be heard. A survivor of significant police misconduct and his attorney. We covered this story earlier and to remind you of the horror of one man being shot at damn near 100 times by the police. We take time on this show to showcase the temper tantrums of Karens in the wild. We do this not because we want to see people's emotional outbursts in public, but because these incidents are emblematic of a bigger societal issue taking place across the nation, and it has to be checked.
My friend, my big homie, attorney at law, Benjamin Crump.
I just want to thank you, man. Educated, articulate brothers like yourself speak truth to power. It makes a great difference in changing the landscape in America. So
listen, no matter what you do, don't allow the politics of ideology to evaporate the soul that still exists inside of you. They don't stop, I don't stop. Racism won't stop, I won't stop. Systemic bias won't stop, I won't stop. People still need health care, so I won't stop. People still need criminal justice systems reformed, so I won't stop. You won't stop either.
This is the first presidential election since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade.
There's so many young women who have been, including a young woman who just was murdered, and he went to the funeral. We have 1,000 trillionaires in America. If we finally beat Medicare.
Every poll is going the same direction. Against Biden, democracy's on the line. On behalf of the Democratic Party, I throw it in. Biden's done. If you go with this guy, guaranteed loss. Joe Biden is a disaster, and nobody's even listening to anything he's saying. Why is our only two choices, two people who are deeply disliked in this country, nearly hated? And if you're in Washington, I just broke your heart because I said Biden might be hated. He's at 38%. Learn math.
There is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. There's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices. Yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now. For the next 6 months, I'll be focused on doing my job as president. We asked you guys to sign a petition that we started about 10 months ago. Everybody said it was impossible, but we just declared victory. We did it.
The TYT petition was circulated as an example of growing sentiment on this issue. So there's a direct link between your action and that outcome.
It took a long time to get there, but the bottom line, brothers and sisters, is he got there.
Tell me about the shirt you're wearing.
Pretty much speaks for itself. What's the penalty for treason? Death. Everything was phenomenal under Donald Trump, and now it's Obama calling the shots right now. It ain't Biden.
So it's Obama calling the shots?
I believe so. None of this would be happening if they hadn't stolen the 2020 election from Trump and we the people.
If you could have an option of 4 years of Donald Trump as a dictator or 4 years of Joe Biden as a president, what would you choose?
Donald Trump.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Also, Angie Davis, I mentioned, our Georgia Suburban Homestead. Thank you for joining with that beautiful join button below. But also thank you for gifting a membership. And Box and Jesse, thank you for gifting 5 memberships. We appreciate you guys. And over at tyt.com/team, we do both donations and membership, and both of those help even more. So if you can, that'd be great. And as I told you earlier, we do have this vote shirt based on the Supreme Court that one of our members designed. And so I love it. That's at shoptyt.com. Make sure you check that out. More in a sec, but Anna.
All right, let's talk a little bit about how China is influencing certain protests here in the United States. Chinese diplomats and pro-China diaspora groups organized an effort to harass and silence American protesters opposed to the CCP's policies when Xi Jinping visited San Francisco in November of last year. That is what you are seeing on your screen right now. You're seeing scuffles among protesters. There is a group of, anti-Xi Jinping, anti-China protesters being confronted by individuals who were apparently supported and partly funded by the Chinese government. This is based on an investigative report that was done by the Washington Post. President Xi was actually here in the United States in San Francisco specifically for an economic summit. Gavin Newsom was hosting it, and he also, by the way, confessed that the reason why he cleaned up San Francisco was specifically for Xi Jinping's visit. And then he proceeded to neglect San Francisco, which is something that he's really a seasoned veteran in doing. Now, who was behind this? Well, the Post identified 32 Chinese diaspora leaders who helped organize these protests, many with ties to the Chinese state. Now, these include ties to the United Front Work Department, an arm of the Communist Party, which uses non-state actors to further China's political goals overseas, blurring the line between civilians and state officials. And the investigation that was done by the Washington Post also makes clear that the demonstrations didn't exactly come together organically. They were facilitated by the Chinese government. The Chinese consulate in Los Angeles paid for supporters' hotel and meals as an incentive to participate, according to messages shared in WeChat groups reviewed by the Post. At least 35 pro-CCP Chinese diaspora groups showed up to that economic summit. APEC is what it was called, including groups from New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington State. Los Angeles-based business owner Lu Kwang, a co-founder or founder of several pro-CCP organizations, said he had organized 20 buses, booked 400 hotel rooms, and coordinated 800 people arriving to welcome Xi at APEC. Again, that's the economic summit. And as a result, hundreds of people dressed in uniforms, hats, banners, and flags came through to show their support for President Xi and attempt to silence, essentially squash opposition protesters, oftentimes with force, with violence. The Post found that while there was aggression from both sides, the most extreme violence was instigated by pro-CCP activists and carried out by coordinated groups of young men embedded among them, verified videos show. Anti-Xi protesters were attacked with extended flagpoles and chemical spray, punched, kicked, and had fistfuls of sand thrown in their faces. And there's also claims that the Chinese consulate, they deny that they had anything to do with this. I'm not buying it because there's a massive amount of evidence that the Washington Post presented in their reporting here. But they did also tally more than a dozen attacks against activists over the 4 days that Xi Jinping was in San Francisco. Among the most severe, well, actually, let me pause because I'm gonna get to some specific instances of the violence that they carried out against the anti-Xi Jinping protesters. Before I do that though, Cenk, I'm curious what you think about this.
Yeah, so later I'm going to talk about an instance where I got attacked in America in a way that some of these folks got attacked that shocked me as it shocked them. And this stuff is obviously unacceptable. I've got another example of another country doing this to some degree. But really, who brings sand to a rally? My point is, these guys ostensibly came in to support Xi Jinping. They're like, oh, in China, oh, we love China and we love this leader.
Yeah, go live in China.
But hold on, if you didn't come to attack the anti-Xi Jinping protesters, why did you bring the sand and the pepper spray and the iron poles?
You came ready to attack, violently.
You came ready to attack.
Exactly.
I mean, even if you pretend, oh, the pole might have been originally part of a flag, oh, he might have had the bear mace on him to protect himself. Why'd you bring the sand? That's super random.
Look,
right?
Listen, I need to understand why these individuals who are in bed with the Chinese government are considered Chinese diaspora. You guys know what diaspora means, right? It means you leave or flee the country you're originally from. And if they love China so much to the point where they're willing to attack American protesters, why don't you go back and live in China? I'm sure they'll take you. Why are you here? If China has such a wonderful government and you are in favor of the way they run things, go live in China.
Yeah, so look, I don't want to take it too far because there's a lot of people love their homeland that they originally came from, and they might want to celebrate it in different ways. But in this case, it's not just about, hey, you love the place and you want to celebrate it. No, you came to do violence against anyone who protests it. And the people who are protesting it are American citizens, and we're not going to have that. So that's why I think the story that they did here is so important. And we need to be ready for this. Next time something like this happens, we need to have cops ready to arrest people and then interrogate them. Who paid you to bring this material to attack American civilians, et cetera, et cetera? Let's do a real investigation here and find out, because now foreign countries are funding all sorts of things here in America. They buy off our politicians, and now are they ready to fund violence in America against American citizens? We should regulate pretty severely against that.
So one of the most severe attacks was carried out against a 51-year-old man by the name of Zhang Kaiyu and his two friends, a 73-year-old and a 40-year-old who are all immigrants from mainland China and Hong Kong. So they were there to protest Xi Jinping's appearance in San Francisco, and they were attacked by the Chinese diaspora that was funded and supported by the Chinese government. On November 17th, the 3 men were walking away from a protest site when they were followed by a group of 9 young men who were there to show support for the CCP during Xi's visit. One of the young men yelled "F you." At that point, Zhang said he felt emboldened to respond, "F Xi Jinping." Then almost immediately, he and his friends were surrounded and beaten. Take a look.
He's old man. He's old man. Don't do that.
Okay, that video infuriates me. I'm gonna try to stay calm. The attack, by the way, left Zhang briefly unconscious. He was taken to the ER where he was treated for signs of concussion and other wounds.
Yeah, so that video is infuriating. So it's one thing to say, hey, you love this country or that country. A lot of folks here in America love their home countries in different ways. It's another thing to send a bunch of thugs to go attack people in the streets of America on behalf of another country. No, we're not gonna have that. Okay, so look, the guy who was beat said a thing that I'm familiar with. I'm a little bit of a political Forrest Gump, right? Because I was at the Elian Gonzalez protest down in Little Havana a long time ago, in the year 2000. You remember when that Cuban boy had to decide whether to send him back home or not?
Elian Gonzalez, right?
Right, Elian Gonzalez. And so when I went to those protests, I thought he should be sent back to his dad, right? Even though I was a Republican at the time, I was like, this isn't right. His parents want him back home, or at least his dad does. And so and that's his only remaining parent. We have to send him back. So I went with a sign, and I was immediately assaulted by about 100 crazed, presumably Cuban Americans.
Definitely Cubans.
Yeah, definitely Cubans, for sure. Presumably Cuban Americans. But anyways, and the cops had to rescue me from that situation, like shirt ripped, lifted off my feet. I mean, I've never been in so much danger in my life, and I couldn't believe it was happening in the streets of America. That, oh, we don't agree with you, so we're going to assault you and maybe kill you. No, that's not what happens. And that's part, guys. That's part of why people were so upset about January 6th. But at least that was us. I'm not excusing it 1%, but it was, is another country doing it? That's even more wrong.
Cenk, look, what happened to you was wrong. I'm not in any way supporting that. But do you understand the difference? Okay, the difference in your situation is Cuban Americans who fled Cuba over the Cuban Revolution and communism and all of that, right? They were fighting to ensure that Elian Gonzalez could stay here in the United States rather than be sent back to Cuba where his father was. You can have your views on that. I don't want to debate that issue. But in this case, with the supporters of Xi Jinping and the current, Chinese government, they are favoring how things are run in China over the way things are run here in the United States. To the point where they are willing to carry out physical violence against Americans who are protesting Xi Jinping's visit. That's so entirely different to me.
No, the motivation is different.
The motivation is different.
The action is the same. If you don't agree with me, I'm going to try to hurt you physically.
Right, and that's wrong.
And I'm going to do it based on my ethnicity. You offended my Cubanness, so I'm going to maybe murder you. Okay, I'm not interested in that, so they could F all the way off with that. But in this case,
you're not getting it. They came here to the United States to live here, and they don't like the way things are run in the United States and favor the way things are run in China. Then go live in China. Why are you part of the Chinese diaspora?
I know, that's the motivation, and I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, look, we can't have it in any circumstance. There was a story out a couple of years ago. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is here. There were protests against him. And in that case, it was not Turkish Americans or paid people. It was basically the equivalent of the Secret Service in Turkey that took it upon themselves to get into a fight with protesters that were American citizens and kicked a bunch of their asses. And then it became a giant diplomatic problem, as it should be, because we cannot have any physical violence here based on politics, and we certainly can't have it coming from a foreign government.
Exactly.
So, yeah, and look, there's 1,000 legitimate reasons to protest any of these governments, And certainly the Chinese government that has concentration camps, they're not killing the Uyghurs, although they kill some of them, but they keep them in camps. So that's my last name. We're named after the Uyghur Turks. And they do re-education of them. It's just the torture, etc. It's brutal. So do we get to protest China to the Chinese premier when he is here in America? Goddamn right we do, because this is America. And if you try to bust that up with paid thugs, there should be significant consequences.
All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, we've got more news for you, including the latest conspiracy theory about the Federal Reserve potentially cutting interest rates soon. We've got that story and more coming up. Don't miss it.
Care. Okay, something writes in YouTube member section. Cenk is wearing the vote shirt. Whoop whoop. Look excellent on you, my man. Anna, that dress is lovely, by the way. A shot of summertime. That's what I said. I said we're going into the fall. What are you doing summer for? But actually, technically, we're still in the summer. So thank you for the comment. I appreciate it. There's a beautiful shirt. Imran Sheikh, one of our members, designed it. This is one of my favorite shirts because it's one of my favorite designs. ShopTYT.com. Okay, obviously we got all the Tim Walz shirts there as well. Okay, Boxer, I said, money in politics is what got me hooked to TYT all those years ago. David Morris writes in, David Lammy, the UK's new foreign secretary, has halted the sale of 30 F-35 jet components to Israel. Bibi is outraged. I always find that amusing. How dare you not give me what I want? The British people should pay for everything that I want, okay? And you owe Israel. No, they don't. The British people don't owe Israel anything. They've given Israel unbelievable amount of assistance, military, financial, etc. How about maybe Israel owes the UK something? Did you ever think about that, Bibi? You know, keep bossing people around, come to America in front of our Congress, tell us about how Americans are idiots for protesting Israel and then how we owe you money. We don't owe you anything at all. The whole idea of a special ally and a special relationship is just mythology. It's just propaganda based on absolutely nothing. David Moore, Christina Elisa Brown says, 2024 is a harsh wake-up call to what people of power are willing to do still. For real estate and defense contractors agreed, they forced the world to witness it, the shame we carry. Look, it's not us carrying the shame, it's our politicians who are disgusting and will sell out to any donor that carry the shame. Gina Jones says, glad to be a member. Gina, we're glad to have you. Sortalum on Twitch says, Cenk NFM, please don't stop what you do. You matter. Much love. Thank you. And it's because of members on all these platforms that we're able to do this. And we appreciate you guys. And guys, we definitely need the contributions. I hate that. I wish we didn't, but we do these days. TYT.com/team. Please help out if you can. Jules to you says, the lever does great work. Yes, they do. And you see us featuring other progressive media outlets, progressive politicians, etc. How many other places are doing that? Usually it's, you're trying to get something passed? What's in it for me? What's my email list? What are you gonna give me, right? So I'm sick of so many people in DC. That's why I love David Sirota and The Lever. He's an honest guy, does great reporting. Love Ryan Grimm and some other honest, beautiful, smart reporters out there. The Gosser says, keep speaking the truth. Much love, Cenk and Anna. Appreciate you guys. Eclectic Miscellanea said, I love David Sirota. I'm a proud subscriber to Lever. Master Plan and Justice is coming. Really go hand in hand. That's actually very true. It would be great if TYT and the Lever could work together on some projects, maybe with the Lever doing investigative work and TYT doing the political analysis. From your mouth to God's ears, but we need resources. And so right now things are very tough. Man, I want to get to better times so we can do all these amazing ideas. Fear and Loathing in New Jersey says, I hope he thinks that $11 million AIPAC gave him was worth his soul. He's not getting younger, referring to Joe Biden. Those politicians think that all the money is definitely worth their soul. All right, back on TYT, Jen Cadano with you guys, and Nutshell Guru and Dave Sacrifice. You guys are amazing for joining through tyt.com/team.
Wait, hold on. Nutshell Guru or Nutshell?
Nutshell.
Fun. Okay, I'm curious about that endeavor.
Okay, well, they're now Young Turks members, so you can find out. Becky Compton and Eric V23, thank you guys for the contribution through tyt.com/team, and I'll talk to you soon. All right, Anna.
Let's talk about interest rates.
Watch the Fed, mark my words, September, they're going to lower rates to help Kamala and Tim Walz.
The Federal Reserve does seem poised to cut interest rates this month, September. The chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, made clear that he was considering a Fed interest rate cut in September. And so it seems like that's going to happen. But is this really some conspiracy to help the Democratic ticket? Or is this really something that the Fed is doing because inflation has actually slowed down? Now, we'll get back to some of what Donald Trump has been saying about the Federal Reserve and the influence he has had on the Federal Reserve dating back to when he was the president of the United States. But before we do, it is important to point out that Hannity is not the only conservative who is claiming that the Federal Reserve is like somehow colluding with the Democratic Party. Conservatives have been suspecting this even when Biden was still the Democratic nominee for the presidential race. Here are Ben Shapiro and Larry Kudlow making similar accusations.
There is one sort of last hope for Joe Biden, and that is maybe Jerome Powell will save him. Investors don't expect the Fed to lower interest rates in July, but they're looking at a September cut. I can't believe it. Why it's so convenient. It's just so convenient. I mean, never mind the fact that, again, the inflation is still running 50% too high. We got to cut those interest rates just in time for the election and hopefully jog Joe Biden to victory. But don't worry, it's all apolitical. They're going to try and shove a Fed rate cut through as fast as humanly possible because they're hoping that that will inflate the economy back into some semblance of serious job growth before the election.
Unless Jay Powell's Federal Reserve wants to completely politicize monetary policy and slash interest rates in order to juice the economy and reelect Joe Biden, unless they want to do that, there is absolutely no reason right now for the Fed to take the foot off the brake and slam down the accelerator. If the Fed were to force feed a rate cut, they would just be reamed, destroyed. It would be political in order to juice the economy for Joe Biden. They could cut 2 times after the election. Okay, November 5th is the election. So if they wanted to cut in November, December, Fed can't cut interest rates because if they do, it'll be so political.
Now, I want to just quickly go back to what Ben Shapiro said in the beginning of that compilation video. It is true that Jerome Powell had announced that he was planning on cutting interest rates in September at a time when inflation was still hot, which I thought was a little suspicious as well.
I don't think it's suspicious
Really?
at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, and by the way, let me just finish my point. So inflation has slowed down. And so now the argument is, okay, well, inflation has actually slowed down. So an interest rate cut makes sense. But I do agree that that announcement was made at a time when there really wasn't any indication that inflation was going to slow down. Inflation was still high.
No. So look, it's a constant balancing act. So the Fed increases and decreases the interest rate, trying to get 2 things accomplished. A strong economy that's booming, but without inflation. Now that's a very tough balance to strike, but actually they've done a remarkable job over the last couple of decades. And I've got a lot of issues with the Fed, and they got to stop printing money and just handing it over to Wall Street. But in terms of inflation and growth, they've done a pretty spectacular job. By the way, they got inflation under control way better than the rest of the world did, and get almost no credit for it. But I'm fair. As much as I was frustrated with Biden at different times and with the Fed certainly at different times, they have done a pretty good job here. And when they're going to do these cuts, they signal them, or increases, they signal them as far ahead as possible. So people are constantly, the markets are constantly talking about, should they cut or should they not cut? The markets want them to cut because it leads to growth. So now there's so many inconsistencies with what the right-wing media are saying here. Number one, they're like, well, if you do, it's dangerous, they shouldn't do the cut. If they do the cut, it'll lead to out of control inflation. Well, isn't that what you want? And why would the Democrats want to do out of control inflation right before the election? So you don't really believe that, do you? Right? And so, they kind of betray themselves with their own talking points. Second of all, none of you are going to point out that Donald Trump berated Jerome Powell and put political pressure on him to cut interest rates throughout his entire time in office?
Yes, there was actually a period of time where Jerome Powell made it clear that he was going to increase interest rates under the Trump administration, and Trump did not, like, there was no backroom dealing with Trump. He was pressuring Jerome Powell very publicly. In fact, we have the receipts.
We have interest rates going up at a clip that's much faster than certainly a lot of people, including myself, would have anticipated. I think the Fed is out of control. I think what they're doing is wrong. Under the Obama administration, you had a lot of help because they had very little interest. You know, when you talk about economies, our economy is far better than that, but we're paying interest, and they weren't. They were using funny money.
The president now in an interview with the Washington Post has said, I'm doing deals and I'm not being accommodated by the Fed. They're making a mistake because I have a gut, and my gut tells me more sometime than anybody else's brain can ever tell me. I'm not even a little bit happy with my selection of Jay Powell, not even a little bit.
The president is not pleased with Jay Powell. Here's the tweet from the president just a few seconds ago saying what the market wanted to hear from Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve was that this was the beginning of a lengthy and aggressive rate-cutting cycle which would keep pace with China, the European Union, and other countries around the world. As usual, Powell let us down, but at least he is ending quantitative tightening, which shouldn't have started in the first place. No inflation. We are winning anyway.
I think you saw that yesterday with the stock market. No, I'm not happy with the Fed because I think that they're following, not leading. We should be leading. I'm not happy because if you look at the central banks of other central banks, largely they're lower than us, their rate.
So that very public bullying, if I remember correctly, led to Jerome Powell caving to Donald Trump's demands. And by the way, the Federal Reserve is supposed to be totally independent of the executive branch or the political back and forth. Like, it's supposed to be an independent entity that makes decisions based on how we're doing with inflation, how we're doing with unemployment, and the like.
Yeah, so to me, the right-wing media's dishonesty here is telling. So you didn't know that Donald Trump tried to bully Jerome Powell and you cover the news? Larry Kudlow, you were in the administration. You know for a fact that Donald Trump did that over and over and over again. Now you're pretending that, oh my God, I think Biden might be doing it for the first time 2 months before an election. Can you believe how terrible the Democrats are? Oh, get off of it, man. Your own guy did it 2,000 times, and now you're not gonna tell your audience that. Of course not, because you're not being an honest actor, you're purposely misleading people. If anything, the markets think that this cut is coming too late. That Powell should have acted earlier. Part of the problem here is that Biden is super weak. And so, yeah, you could say, hey, no, he's doing the right thing by not pressuring Powell. They're supposed to be independent. But after Trump pressured him, if I was in charge, I definitely would have pressured him. And I would have pressured him to cut earlier. Cutting 2 months before the election, I don't think is going to make almost any difference. If they really wanted to affect the election, they would have cut it 4 months earlier, okay? Given it time for the economy to pick up, and not just for the stock market to pick up, but for real Americans to feel it in their pocketbooks with higher wages or more employment, et cetera. And they chose not to do that because Biden's weak. So he didn't pressure Powell at all. It's the exact opposite of what Shapiro and Kudlow just told you.
Explain to me how lower interest rates would translate to higher wages for workers. We had insanely low interest rates beginning with the economic collapse of 2008, and our wages remain stagnant. So how does that make sense?
So the reason why it's a balancing act, guys, is because you can't go too much in either direction because it creates different problems. But the way that low interest rates create a stronger economy overall, again, it has the other downsides, but in this context is once you lower the rates, people invest more because then it's easier to make a return because you don't have to pay as much in financing for any project that you start or fund. So that's why when they increase the rates, now all of a sudden your money costs more to finance a project. For example, one of the things it does is it ends off tech financing. So tech has been in a lot of trouble ever since they increased the rates. So the tech companies and other industries are going, cut the rates, because otherwise we can't get funding. And so once they put funding into, to pick any random industry, agriculture, well, there's going to be investments. So they're going to create new projects that have people get hired and affect the supply and demand of the market, so wages go up because there's greater demand for jobs. So that's traditionally why lower interest rates lead to a better economy. But if you overdo it, it stimulates the economy too much, thereby creating inflation. And who overdid it in interest rate cuts at the Fed? Donald Trump. He said, cut, cut, cut. You just heard him and saw him with your own eyes. Cut, I don't care if it's right or wrong, just keep cutting, right? And you know what that leads to in the long run? Inflation. This is simple economics. So, but did you hear anyone in right-wing media pointing out to you that if you keep interest rates too low for too long, it'll lead to inflation? And that's what Trump did, and that was not the only reason, but part of the reason we had that booming inflation? No, they never told you that, right? Because they hide facts from you if it's inconvenient to their cause.
All right, let's take our final break. When we come back, Trump explains his speaking style and how it's actually really brilliant. It's just that you don't understand it. And later in the show, if we have time, we'll talk about this insane attack against a journalist who dared criticize the Democratic establishment for covering up Joe Biden's mental decline. Come right back.
All right, guys, a couple of programming notes. First, if you're a small business out there, you want to advertise on the Young Turks, we'd be happy to have you, and we could arrange this so that you could afford it. TYT.com/sponsorships. So normally we don't do that because we're a national show, and it's tougher for small businesses to advertise, especially if they're local on a national show. But we figured if you put it in a clip, you could actually get that to whichever market that you think makes sense for you, local, otherwise. And we want to feature you guys. And if you want to help, well, get something back there if you have a small business. So TYT.com/sponsorships. Also, Trump brackets is starting to get hot. We're about to get to the round of 64 and have your predictions come in, but there's a little bit more voting left before we get to the final 64. It's a nail biter, so make sure you check it out at TrumpBrackets.com. Make sure you vote, and once you vote, you see how others voted too. It's really interesting. We got Operation Joy tonight for the members, so use that QR code. If you got a picture and a story about something that gave you joy, super easy to win that Team Joy t-shirt. So scan that QR code, participate. We got another winner that we're gonna read for you guys in the bonus episode today. And so, all right, let's go to our members. Biden Flavor Corn Pop said, great interview on Lex, Cenk, but it's 4 hours, long AF. So I had to split watch it in two to watch LOL, but worth it. Thank you, appreciate it. Louis Cypher says, Anna looking marvelous as is the norm. Teddy Cool says, Cenk, I enjoyed your 4-hour interview with Lex. Definitely one of my favorites of that podcast. A couple other people wrote in saying the same thing. I appreciate you guys. Yeah, if you get a chance, look, that's one place where you can see a lot of my ideology in one conversation. And it's been gratifying to see not just the left wing, but a lot of the right wing and a lot of independents saying, oh, that makes sense. Corporatism, that's the real issue. And it introduced a couple of concepts that people now say helps them think about current day politics. It's super gratifying to hear that. I appreciate it deeply, but it's a good thing to check out. Lex Friedman, and you can see it on his YouTube channel. Uriah Heap says, do you know when you pay your taxes, consider it a campaign donation to the defense and Big Pharma. See how much better you feel knowing that they take your opinion seriously. Not, and then angry emoji. Well, look, that's interesting. Maybe we should do a movement where we ask the IRS to consider some of this non-taxable, because we're funding all these giant corporations through our taxes. But interesting beginning of an idea. Dragon with a Girl Tattoo says, congrats to John and Damage Report on reaching 1 million subs. That's right, it happened over the weekend. Super psyched about it. Everybody check out Damage Report. That's of course another one of our channels on YouTube. And Navinix writes in, one way to offset our tax dollars funding all you can kill soirees in Gaza is to empower anti-war voices like TYT. Appreciate you saying that. Obviously, I agree. And thank you at tyt.com/team if you want to help do that. And then Walter Beasley on Super Chat saying thank you for telling the truth. We appreciate you. You allow us to happen. Christina Lisa Brown says it's not easy being cheesy, but Anna and Cenk look great. Give us the news with grace and honesty. You're appreciated, and TYT is America's #1 news. Thank you. We'll be All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. I'm gonna read one super chat from Rosa Diaz because I really appreciate it. She wrote in, you guys deserve another one of my small contributions. I was a CNN viewer for years, but recently saw one of your videos and I liked how the truth was told and explained. We appreciate you so much, Rosa. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for being open-minded.
Thank you, Rosa.
Anna.
All right, well, let's get into this insane story involving, honestly, a pretty mainstream journalist who got trashed for telling the truth.
The idea that parties vote the same despite representing districts or states that are all across the country, that's just insane. And so if I could wave the magic wand, I'd get rid of the two parties.
We ended up having kind of a friendly conversation.
With a gun pointed at you?
Washington, D.C. has become a punchline to a never-ending joke.
How come that clap doesn't work?
No, it does. I think the term we use is it's wicked old.
That was the trailer for New York Magazine's Olivia Nuzzi's new Bloomberg show. It's about, well, it's basically about to get crushed because of the PR that was supposed to be carried out to promote it. Now that PR has been erased thanks to a small group of loud liberals who are upset at her for reporting the truth about how the Democratic Party was covering up Biden's mental decline. So back in July, Nuzzi was announced to lead a 6-episode interview series titled Working Capital on Bloomberg's TV network. And according to Variety, it focuses on candid exchanges with political and business leaders. And there was supposed to be a big PR push for this series, okay? Lots of press around it, a lot of commercials around it, but it was scrapped after Nuzzi wrote an article, an op-ed, if you will, criticizing President Joe Biden and the Democratic Party's attempts to cover up his mental decline. It was titled "The Conspiracy of Silence to Protect Joe Biden. The President's Mental Decline was like a dark family secret for many elite supporters." Now, before I get to some of the takeaways, Cenk, you and I know from personal experience what it was like to tell the truth about Joe Biden. We dealt with a lot of backlash from our own audience about it, but we continued to tell the truth because that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and it's not just backlash you get in public, it's stuff that's underhanded like this that happens behind the scenes. So I would get booked at a university, I would get unbooked in a couple of days. I'd get booked on cable news, I would get unbooked halfway through the day. Wherever I was going to give a speech, etc. Because the thugs that run the Democratic Party think, oh, a debate where you find out who's the better candidate. Ugh, that's terrible. What if you guys pick the candidate that won't service the donors? Well, we can't have that. No, it doesn't matter if he can't walk, talk, or anything like that. Everybody bow their heads to Joe Biden. So I can tell you 1,000 stories of this kind of thuggish behavior. And now let's get to their foot soldiers who help their authoritarian rule at the DNC.
Yeah, and look, before I get into more details, I just want to say, if you happen to be someone who runs a media organization or a company and you immediately cave to an online mob, you have absolutely no right to lead anything, okay? You're weak, you're pathetic, and you are susceptible to a group of anonymous people online throwing a hissy fit over someone actually telling the truth. It's pathetic.
Anna, yes, but that's only a part of the story, right? They're also worried about losing access, and they're worried that these guys, that's basically the Biden team saying, or the Democrats saying, you better not do anything that criticizes us. You remember Mika Brzezinski admitting after 2016 that the Hillary team would call them all the time and tell them what to say and not say on air?
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, so what do you want to be? You want to be a dog? Like you want to be walked on a leash by the Democratic Party? Or do you want to do journalism?
Well, for an enormous part of the mainstream media, the answer is clear. Please walk me like a dog.
Okay, then don't pretend like you're a journalist. But Olivia Nuzzi did the right thing. She publishes this piece. I'm going to give you a few excerpts so you can understand why the elite would be so upset about it. She wrote, in January, I began hearing similar stories from Democratic officials, activists, and donors. All people who supported the president and were working to help reelect him to a second term in office. Following encounters with the president, they had arrived at the same concern. Could he really do this for another 4 years? Could he even make it to election day? These were the actual concerns that were being aired behind the scenes, while publicly, probably the very same people were like, rah, rah, Biden, second term, second term. Things were bad. And they knew things were bad, and they knew others must also know things were bad, and yet they would need to pretend outwardly that things were fine. The president was fine. The election would be fine. They would be fine. To admit otherwise would mean jeopardizing the future of the country, and well, nobody wanted to be responsible personally or socially for that. Nuzzi also made the point that there were good days and bad days for Biden going all the way back to 2020, something that we're also familiar with. But Biden had deteriorated so much that she questioned, like, who's actually in charge here? Who was actually in charge? Nobody knew. But surely someone was in charge. And surely there must be a plan, since surely this situation could not endure. I heard these questions posed at cocktail parties on the coast, but also at MAGA rallies in Middle America. Resistance or QAnon, they shared a grand theory of America in 2024. There has to be a secret group of high-level government leaders who control Biden and who will soon set into motion their plan to replace Biden as the Democratic presidential nominee. Nothing else made sense. They were in full agreement. Now, her July 4th piece was met with mass criticism, especially from a group of Democrats online who weren't happy with the article because she, did the unthinkable in the field of journalism. She did journalism. So they began tweeting at Bloomberg demanding that Nuzzi be fired, okay? But that's not all. They also began to call her racist, a Democratic Party favorite, right? Smear the person you don't like as a racist or one of the other isms. And what they did is they went all the way back to her Twitter feed to pick out literal jokes that are obvious jokes to make it seem like she was tweeting those things, not in jest, not sarcastically, but she actually meant it. So I'm gonna give you a few examples, okay? She went all the way back, they went all the way back to the Obama years. They gave this example. Kenyan anti-colonial shows teeth to small child. Okay, so it's a picture of Obama, his mouth is open. And so she's making fun of people who referred to Obama not as an American citizen, not as an American who was born in America, but as a Kenyan. You guys really think that Olivia Nuzzi believes that Obama is Kenyan and not an American?
Yeah.
Come on.
Okay, so look, the people who do those smears are some of the worst people in America. And I know that it's been done to me. And so they will take jokes that I said and then pretend they weren't jokes. And so that's happened to me thousands of times and happened pretty spectacularly during when I ran for Congress. All of a sudden, these Democratic trolls and bots appear out of nowhere and they find videos from 13 years ago, a blog from 19 years ago, something from 7 years ago, and they take a joke and they go, he meant it, he's anti-Semitic, he's anti-Muslim, he's racist, he's sexist, etc. They do it every time. And you make the country hate Democrats every time you do that. Because any reasonable person goes out and goes, well, obviously Nuzzi was joking. She doesn't think, she's making fun of the people who thought Obama was actually Kenyan. Now you're gonna lie and pretend she was being a racist right-winger? Oh, I hate all these Democrats who say everything is racist and everything is sexist.
Here's another example that they picked out. This is a tweet, again about Obama, dating back to 2016. Do you think Obama ever gets tired of being a secret Kenyan Muslim lizard person who plots terror attacks from the White House? Like, look, let me just say this. not only is it disgusting when people who aren't racist are smeared as racist, specifically to try to destroy their careers over political disagreements, them picking out these tweets to paint her as a racist is insulting to all of our intelligence.
Yes,
okay?
And by the way, if you work at Bloomberg and you panicked over that,
pathetic.
Your intelligence should be insulted.
Seriously.
You should be greatly insulted. You can't tell those are jokes and you panicked over that? But you know, like I said earlier, guys, they're not panicking over two randos. No, because they're not randos. There's some people who really mean it, like the Hal Sparks of the world, who are like, oh my God, Democratic leaders are the greatest people on earth. They've never done anything wrong. It's all 100 and 0. All the Republicans are monsters, and the Democrats are the most beautiful. And if you ever criticize a Democrat, sexist, racist, bigot, sexist, racist. Okay, yeah, we got it. So goddamn annoying. It actually hurts the Democratic Party greatly to have like people like that theoretically on our side, just embarrassing and humiliating the party over and over again with their ass kissing 24/7. So yes, there's some genuine people who do it, but there are tons of people who are sent out from the party to do these disingenuous attacks. And when they do that, basically what the Bloombergs of the world are deciding is, oh, the party's upset with us, and we have to go back to kissing their ass.
Yeah.
So
they canceled, Bloomberg decided after caving to this mob to cancel the high profile rollout of her show. And Nuzzi was critical of the network's decision to do so. She spoke to Ben Smith over at Semaphore and said the following: when I write something that agitates the right, I am accused of being a liberal activist. When I write something that agitates the left, I am accused of being a conservative activist. Olivia, totally agree, know exactly what that's like. The difference is that mainstream media organizations tend to ignore bad faith campaigns against reporters led by the right. I have no illusions about massive corporate media entities and their tolerance for even the faintest murmurs of a PR crisis. So I can't say I was surprised, but I was disappointed. And then she says the following, which I think is the most important point here. She says, I really believe that if you want to live in a world that is forgiving and where people hold even those they disagree with to the same standards they wish to be held, you can't cave to mob pressures as a means to protect yourself, even when it would be a lot easier to do so. That's how this type of culture is formed and maintained, and as individuals, we get to decide if we think it's worth enduring a little pain to fight against it.
Yeah, so look, if you don't think that there's Democratic bullies who try to make sure that no criticism of the Democratic Party or its leaders get out in the press, you just are literally ignorant. You're ignorant of how media works. So if you want to live and bask in that ignorance, that's up to you as if you're a normal citizen, okay? And believe in a fairyland where one side is 100% right and filled with angels, right? But if you're in the media and you keep caving to those bullies, are you really in news? Or are you just a low-level marketing executive?
Exactly. And by the way, to that mob of Democrats who were attacking Olivia Nuzzi, like what exactly did they think was gonna happen if all of the reporters played ball and provided cover for the Democratic Party and pretended as if there was nothing wrong with Biden's mental health? Well, what do you think would have happened? Now all of a sudden there's all this excitement among the Democratic electorate now that Biden has been replaced with Kamala Harris. Is that not a better situation if you love the Democratic Party so much and you want to ensure that the Democrat wins over Donald Trump?
Yeah.
This is the thing about these people, Cenk. They want to sleepwalk toward their own destruction, like viciously so.
Yeah, no, so I want to comment on that. Two important things here at that. So number one, so for the people who helped to push Biden out, some of us have never been forgiven and will never be forgiven, even though we helped to get to a much better place.
I don't want your forgiveness, bitches.
Okay, so no, I know, but like,
at all.
But in my experience, the great majority of Democratic voters have now gone, oh, you guys are right, thank God. Oh my God, we're winning, we were losing, now we're winning, that's amazing. And I like Kamala Harris better than I like Joe Biden. I like Tim Walz a lot better than what we had before, et cetera. So great. Okay, now no matter how we got here, terrific, right? But there is a significant percentage of Democrats who are like, I will always do what leadership says. I am the bower. I bow, right? And those guys, they're still livid at all of us. Me, whoever else was involved, even Nancy Pelosi. But, okay, so if you're just admitting you have no mind at all, you just will do kiss the ass of any leader put in front of you. And that's just pathetic. And then finally, guys, why do you another reason not to do this stupid ass kissing is that it leads to an enormous distrust of the system. Why do you think people are so upset? Why do you think the right wing's so upset? A lot of progressives are so upset because we know that there is something else going on behind the scenes instead of what the media is reporting. So why do you think a lot of Democrats were like, oh my God, Nancy Pelosi all of a sudden hates Joe Biden and is trying to take him down? No, it's that she knew what all the professionals knew, which is that he was going to lose and he was going to drag Congress down with him. But she knew that for a long time. That's why it was a surprise to you, but not a surprise to her. So, but you never got told that story. So what happens? When you know the media is lying to you, it leads to conspiracy theories. So what else don't we know behind the scenes? And by the way, Nancy Pelosi was right. The Democrats were losing Congress to generic Republican versus Democrat by 2 points before when Biden was in the race. Now they're winning by 5 points. So they're much more likely to win Congress. But they never told you that while they had Biden in the race.
Right.
Because the media and Democratic establishment lied to you on purpose en masse to get you to vote for any Democratic leader, no matter who it is and no matter what their mental state is.
Yeah, look, I'm just real sick and tired of people who are motivated not by logic, not by what's best for the country, but by their desire to constantly get spanked by the elites. Yeah. And like the idea that journalistic institutions should cave to their demands infuriates me. But what infuriates me more is more often than not, they do cave to those demands. Because you're right, Cenk, they are obsessed with access. They are obsessed with ingratiating themselves with the Democratic Party, and they will do so to your detriment.
And I'll add one last thing here. Remember, the Democratic Party, now even more so than the Republican Party used to have the lead, but both of them are the top clients for a lot of these media companies. They buy an enormous amount of ads during election season. Last election season, when there wasn't even a presidential election, they spent $17 billion, almost all of which went to mainstream media. And so those mainstream media outlets, that's where their bread is buttered. So they're gonna kiss the Republican and Democratic parties' asses from here to eternity. And they're gonna lie to you from here to eternity and cover up their faults and pretend that Biden isn't too old, which was insanity. And the minute anyone points it out, whether it's us or Olivia Nuzzi, they're like, shame, heretic, telling the American people the truth. What if they find out, right? And they're supposed to be in news? I don't think so at all.
All right, in our bonus episode today, we're gonna have Operation Joy as always, but I also really wanna cover this fun Trump story.
Yeah, that's gonna lead to joy for you guys. And so we are gonna do the Trump story about how he's a magic weaver.
He be weaving.
Yeah, and I think you guys are gonna love that story. All right, so and what is Operation Joy? For those of you who are unfamiliar, I think you're gonna love it. So we read people's stories of joy, and we ask you guys to participate. You don't have to do anything at all, right? But if you want to, we're actually trying to spread a little bit of happiness in the world. I know it's crazy, especially for a news show, but what are we fighting for all these good policies for, like paid family leave, et cetera, to make the world a little bit better place? So while we're fighting in that direction, what we want to do is get to happiness now too. And there's other ways to do it. There's plenty of ways to do it, as we talk about in Operation Joy every Tuesday for the members. So far, again, gratified to see that people love it, and we love you guys participating. We got more great stories in this episode tonight. So make sure you're checking that out along with the fun Trump clip. And then I wanted to just read the last couple of things here. Anna, you asked, Christina Lisa Brown wrote in, my friends say I give great advice about life in a nutshell. After 30 years, I'm nutshell guru. Anna and Jenk said my nickname. I know I'm crazy, but I'm giddy. That's
no,
fun.
I love that. That's so good.
Yeah, and we are out of time. Okay, much love, guys. tyt.com/team to join or hit the join button below, and we'll see you there in a second.